just wanted to welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. And thanks to the Adult Education Committee. This is our final faith conversation of the year, so I want to thank the committee and Jake for all he does with us. It's been a great year, and we're excited that this is how we're ending the year. Back in the last year, we were planning out our schedule. I looked at the calendar and said, hey, May 4th is a Sunday. So I've got an idea that maybe nobody's really going to think of at a church, but everybody was intrigued. And then Jake said, I love the idea, and I've got the perfect person who can present this for us. And then when I wrote the email to Breen asking him, I was a bit nervous before hit send. He might go, this is the craziest thing, but he said, oh, I love it. And so we're thrilled that he said yes. And I want to welcome Jimmy Moreno, who's with us, Breen's assistant. And he's been working with Breen, and he'll be assisting him in the presentation. And a lot of you, a lot of you know Breen. He's a great member of the church, super involved. If you've come to church on a Sunday, he's probably signed you in and greeted you as his work as an usher. I really appreciate that about him. And he's also the chairman of the Student Ministries Committee, and he's just a really thoughtful, caring part of the church. You might not even know that he's a successful television writer. Some of his credits are Roswell, Alias, Ghost Whisperer, and he's the executive producer of Criminal Minds. So pretty cool. So we're thrilled that he's here. So with that, Breen Frazier.
Today is May the 4th, isn't it? This is embarrassing. Here's what, next week I'm doing, for the Unitarians, I'm doing the science of Star Trek. Then the week after that, for the Buddhists, I'm doing the Nirvana of Nirvana. All right. Welcome. May the 4th be with you. Also with you. May the 4th was not a thing when I was growing up with Star Trek. I don't know about you. It was not a thing. It became a thing. Does anyone know where it started? On May the 3rd, 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister for the first time, and the Conservatives took out an ad in the conservative newspaper that said, Maggie, may the 4th be with you. That's where it started. And you know, Jediism is now a religion. It's an officially recognized religion in England, which is very interesting. Some of you might not notice this, but my assistant Jimmy here has broken out into a cold sweat because we have this down to the syllable in terms of the cues. And I'm deviating from it on purpose because I have to give Jimmy a shout out for all of the work that he has done. He has put more work into this than I have, hundreds of hours, and so if we could just please give him a round of applause. But let's talk about why I'm here. I'm here to talk about how Star Wars has affected and reflected spiritual ideas throughout almost the past 50 years. And I'm going to focus, as a time management issue, I have to focus on the first 3 movies that were released. So the movies from 1977 to 1983. But it's not just because of, I want to get you guys out of here in an hour. The first 3 movies are where the spiritual ideas are the clearest and the easiest to talk about, and I think the most accessible. But before we talk about spirituality, we have to talk about the power that Star Wars had. Because for those of you maybe who weren't born in 1977, you need to understand the impact that it had when it opened. So let's start with May 25th, 1977. That was opening day for Star Wars. Not May the 4th, as you might think, but it was May the 25th. And when you think about what was happening in 1977 and where we were as a country, it's easy to start with these 3 men, our presidents, leading up to 77. Nixon, Ford, and Jimmy Carter. Probably not our most fondly remembered presidents, although Jimmy Carter has been reclaimed. But they were reflective of the fact that trust in institutions were at an all-time low, right? The US was still reeling from the double loss of Nixon's resignation and the loss of the war in Vietnam. How about economically? How is the country doing? Well, not good. This is the misery index. The misery index is a measure of stagflation, which again, some of you might not know what that is. Stagflation is the measurement of high unemployment and high inflation. So the misery index is not something you want to be scoring high on, and as you can see from this chart, in the 1970s, we were basically in a slight dip between peaks of stagflation. So we weren't doing great economically. Okay, how about culturally? What was the country going through? Well, we were 10 years past the Beatles' message of all you need is love. The Beatles themselves had broken up. And in August of 1977, Elvis Presley would be gone. So music didn't mean as much, or at least the music that of the generation beforehand wasn't holding together. And finally, organized religion. Throughout the 1970s, there was more diversity and pluralism in the pews throughout the country. But at the same time, there was a rise in evangelicalism and the religious right. Society was still grappling with the success of the civil rights movement, but also facing a backlash to prayer in public schools. All of which is to say, by early 1977, the world and the country was complicated. It was complicated like, say, a Stanley Kubrick movie. The Apollo space program from 1968 to 1972 made us look up in the sky and ask what is out there. And the answer that we got back from our art, as reflected in this classic 1968 movie from Stanley Kubrick, 2001: A Space Odyssey, is that space was cold, and it was silent, and it was mysterious. And our rational brains can handle that ambiguity. But when life gets complicated, sometimes you want a story that reminds you of old patterns, of our core humanity, and of the journeys we go on that unite and bind us together. All of which is to say, on May 24th, 1977, this was state-of-the-art storytelling. But on May 25th, it looked like this. Star Wars was the first movie I saw in the movie theater. I was 3 years old, and it imprinted on me like a ecstatic religious experience would. My parents took me to church every Sunday. They did not know that they had already lost me. These giant words scrolling from the bottom of the screen, it was like the reverse of Moses coming down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments. This was my burning bush moment. And I didn't know why these images, these ideas were so powerful to me, but George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, did, and he explained why and how they were so important in a conversation he had with fellow director Christopher Nolan.
Visual effects by that time. The one thing I grabbed onto was that, as opposed to Stanley Kubrick, who has got 1 2-minute shots in his film, where the thing just sits there and the ship's slowly through the thing. But you can see every detail on that, and it's perfect. So I said, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do shots that are only about 12 frames, 32 frames at the most, and it'll move by so fast that you won't see the outlines. And you won't see, how it's put together. It'll just be a razzle-dazzle of visual fantasy.
In other words, Lucas razzle-dazzled us with speed. That was his secret weapon. And when the scroll disappeared and what happened next in the movie, all audiences could do in 1977 was go, whoa. Now, this scene today almost looks quaint, right? Compared to what computer and visual effects can do. But it wasn't just the effects. It was the characters, it was the story, it was the way that it moved you. Star Wars moved you like no other movie did at the time, right? What proof? Here's a list of the movies of the 1970s leading up to Star Wars. Now, there are some good movies on this list. There are some great movies on this list, but no movie made you want to stand up and cheer like it was Game 7 of the World Series. And this, what Jimmy's about to play, is audio from a movie theater in 1977 at the end of Star Wars. That's what I want everyone to understand who was born after 1977. What I want you to understand. Star Wars made you feel joy at a time when the country needed to feel some joy. Today, we take Star Wars for granted. Everything that it did well, has been done better by the Marvel movies or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. But Star Wars was first, and it captured your attention in a way that nothing else did. And in the process, it captured the culture.
The movie is called Star Wars. And since it opened here 9 days ago, capacity crowds have filled the 1,100 seats in the theater almost daily.
Well, I'm a real science fiction fan. I've got hundreds of science fiction books at home, and I think this is going to be a science fiction classic.
Why are you waiting in such a long line to see a movie?
Well, we've just been looking forward to seeing it. We've waited about a week. We were hoping the lines had kind of diminished, but we just kind of wanted to see it tonight. We're pretty enthusiastic about space program and things along that nature.
What do you think sets this film aside from all the other science fiction films there are?
Publicity, it's the thing to do is to go and see Star Wars, so we're all here doing the thing too.
I liked all the monsters and how they placed it out in space. And the fights.
It makes you laugh, it makes you feel like, you want to get up and get the baddies and all that.
Was it up to expectation?
More.
Well, it was stupid. You really need to ride in the toilet. I mean, it was so long drawn out. The only bit that was any good was the end of it, where the party was on. I'd rather not have a wedding day.
There's always a dissenting opinion. That woman is my mom, by the way. Now, all this might be very interesting and academic, but you might be asking the question that my son Griffin asked me. A couple nights ago, I was talking about this talk, and he said, this is all great, I guess, but how is it spiritual, right? And that's a great question. It's a question I'm going to come back to again and again. But my point is that Star Wars showed audiences what we know from coming together on a Sunday morning. That if you get a bunch of people together and you give them the right message, you can inspire your audience. So what did George Lucas inspire audiences with? He did it with a concept called the Force. Now, I know that Chris has already talked a little bit about the Force in her sermon, but what is the Force? Well, that's going to get incredibly complicated over the next 35 minutes or so. So for now, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to start it, and by keeping it simple, with the definition that Alec Guinness in the first movie gave us from the first movie. Sorry, got lost.
And the Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
All right, that's pretty easy to get your head around, right? There's nothing, that's pretty simple. This is what the Christians might call the Holy Spirit, what Buddhists might call samsara, the flow of life, what Muslims might call the taqwa, which is God consciousness. But George Lucas, interestingly enough, was getting into this universality of religious ideas from a very early age.
The idea of why do we think the way we think, why do we do what we do, why do we form our society the way we find it? It was something I did when I was about 8 years old with my mother when she was putting me to bed. I asked her a question. I said, Mom, if there's only one God, why are there so many religions? And it's a question that has fascinated me ever since. And if you really look at it, you say, well, most people say, well, what's the difference between a Shia and a Sunni? What's the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant? What are any different? Or we all believe in the Jewish God. But what about the Jewish God and the gods that came before? And Buddha is a little bit different, but in the end, if you think of it as one God, you say, well, everybody expresses it differently, but it's still, basically don't kill people and be compassionate and love people. And so that's basically all Star Wars is.
Don't kill, be compassionate, right? Whether you're 7 or 70, you can get your head around that. But there's a particular incident in George Lucas's life that I want to focus on because it really got him thinking about his place in the universe. And to understand it, we have to go to a different date, a little bit earlier than May of 1977. We have to go to June 12th, 1962. And at this point, Lucas was a teenager, and he was obsessed with two things, cars and racing. His first car was an Auto Bianchino. It's an Italian mini car based on the Fiat 500. It looked like this. That's Lucas there on the tail end of it. But on that fateful June 12th, Lucas got into a car accident. His car was T-boned by a bigger car, and if you can imagine this car getting T-boned, you can imagine what that would happen. What would happen? His car rolled, it smashed into a tree, and this is actually what his car looked like after the accident. Now, amazingly, miraculously, on the third roll, before it hit the tree, Lucas's seatbelt snapped, and he was thrown from the car. If he had been in the car when it hit the tree, he would have died. When paramedics arrived, he wasn't breathing, he had no heartbeat, his lungs were crushed, and he hovered near death for the next 2 weeks of his life in the hospital, but he pulled through. And he said something very reflective to Starlog magazine in 1981. He said, "I spent some time in the hospital, and I realized that it probably wouldn't be smart for me to be a race driver, especially after the accident. Before that first accident, you were very oblivious to the danger, because you don't realize how close to the edge you are. But once you've gone over the edge and you realize what's on the other side, it changes your perspective." Now, am I saying the Force came from a car crash? I'm not saying that. But I'm not saying that either. What I am saying is that when we talk about higher power, destiny, the things beyond our control, the things that the Force is made up of, this car crash changed Lucas's course of his life. He stopped wanting to be a race car driver, and he started wanting to be a photographer and a filmmaker. Now, Lucas very famously made the movie American Graffiti in 1973, and then he wanted to remake Flash Gordon as a movie, but he couldn't get the rights. So he said, all right, I'll come up with my own version. And to get inspiration, he drew from this book, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Now, I know Chris talked about this book a little bit as well, but I really want to get into it. This book is a fascinating dissection of the common tropes and ideas found in myths throughout millennia. And when I say myths, I mean all of our religious stories. You have absorbed the ideas in this book, whether you realize it or not, because here's a quick breakdown of what Campbell diagrams. It's comes in the form of a circle. Can everybody see this? Enough. Okay. Basically, the hero starts at the top of the normal world. Right there. He receives a call to adventure. In the process of the call, he meets his mentor. He crosses the threshold from the known world to the unknown world. As he goes down the circle, he faces trials and failures, but also meets people who are going to help him along the way. He grows new skills. And then at the bottom of the circle there, he suffers a symbolic, or sometimes literal, death and rebirth. He comes out of that death and rebirth with a revelation. He changes who he is. Whatever weaknesses or flaws he might have had at the beginning of the journey have been burned away. He atones. He gets a gift. And in the process of getting that gift, he returns from the unknown world to the known world, changed. And he is now a hero because he has gone on this journey. All right. How does Star Wars fit this mold? Well, you have our hero, Luke Skywalker. He gets the call to adventure from his mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He crosses the threshold of his known home into the unknown.
Mos Eisley Spaceport. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
At Mos Eisley, he meets his allies in the form of Han Solo and Chewbacca. He learns new skills as he goes on his journey. He learns how to fight with a lightsaber. He goes into the belly of the beast in the form of the Death Star that is controlled by the evil Empire. And his symbolic death and rebirth happens here in a very famous trash compactor scene where the walls are closing in on him and he and his friends escape at the very last second. Whoa, getting a long feedback. Thank you. The trash compactor scene happens a little bit more than halfway through the movie. So it's at the exact point that we've diagrammed, right? Once they escape, Luke makes his revelation, but this revelation comes, as it often does, from loss. In this case, Luke loses his mentor. But from that revelation, he returns changed. He goes back to his normal world, which is in the form of a ragtag group of freedom fighters that he's been wanting to join since the beginning of the movie. He gets his revelation in the most unlikely place possible, in the cockpit of his ship.
Use the Force,
And he finishes his journey and gets a cool medal as a result. All right. Like I said, we have been consuming the hero's journey throughout our entire lives in movies and TV shows and books. Everything from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter to Finding Nemo, but also books in the Bible. Stories in the Bible, to Moses, the story of Moses, the story of Jonah and the whale, where you literally have your hero going into the belly of the beast, to, yes, the story of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, before everyone gets real nervous, let me say that I am not here to talk anyone out of their faith, and I am not here to discuss how we interpret the truth of the Bible at all. I am just trying to point out the structure of the way that we tell stories. And this structure goes back to us being on the savannah together and telling stories over the fire. In this case, the hero's journey of Christ starts with Christ in the known world of heaven. His journey starts in heaven. He crosses the threshold into the unknown by becoming human. That is his journey. He meets John the Baptist. He practices several miracles, goes through challenges and temptations, and then suffers a literal death at the bottom of the circle, but is resurrected, is changed, and he ascends back into his known world in heaven and completes his journey at the right hand of the Father. It's fascinating the way we tell these stories, and they follow this mold. And George Lucas knew that, and he wanted to follow the same story structure. Only he knew that it had to be as accessible to the biggest audience possible, so he didn't want to tie himself down to any one belief system or other, as he told Bill Moyers.
What do you make of the fact that so many people have interpreted Star Wars as being profoundly religious?
I don't see Star Wars as profoundly religious. I see Star Wars as taking all of the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down into a more modern and more easily accessible construct that people can grab onto to accept the fact that there is a greater mystery out there. Religion is basically a container for faith. Faith is the glue that holds us together as a society. Faith in our culture, our world, or whatever it is that we're trying to hang on to, is a very important part of, I think, allowing us to remain stable, remain balanced.
I love that statement. Faith is the glue that holds religion together. So if that's the case, it kind of begs the question, why did Lucas call it the Force, right? Why not call it the Faith? Yeah. Well, he did it because all artists are the product of their inspirations. And in this case, Lucas was inspired, as a young man, by experimental film. And there's one short experimental film called 2187. It came out in the early 60s. And 2187 is an abstract collage of images, sounds, and snippets of dialogue that the director basically grabbed out of discarded footage in the trash can of an editing bin. And a third of the way through this 9-minute film, there is this exchange that Jamie's going to play for you in a second. And in this exchange, a philosopher and a neuroscientist are having an argument. And what you're going to hear is the philosopher arguing that human beings are more than just electrical impulses in the brain. Pay attention to the dialogue, not the images.
Many people feel that in sort of the contemplation of nature and in communication with other living things, they become aware of some kind of force or something behind this apparent mask, which we see in front of us. and they call it God, or they, depending on their particular disposition. To the question,
meaning feelings or thoughts
of
some aspect of it.
Of some aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, is not the same thing as a world full of human beings.
So that's where the Force comes from, right there. In case you want to, impress your nerdy friends, that's where it comes from. Lucas has admitted this influence, even putting it in the movie, in the cell that Princess Leia is held in halfway through the movie, is cell number 2187. And then years later, in 2015, the character of Finn from the movie The Force Awakens, his full name is FN2187. So he puts it in the movie. So now that Lucas had the inspiration, how could he present this idea in visual terms, right? Well, he does it through character. He does it through big and little moments that seed both miracles and a belief system. Moments like...
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
Mind control of the weak. Also,
stretch out with your feelings.
letting the Force control your feelings so you can predict what's going to happen next. Then the movie starts to make it feel like the Force is kind of like a greeting, like, may, peace be with you, or assalamu alaikum.
The Force will be with you, always.
It can be used to say, I'm sorry, or good luck.
Hey, Luke. May the Force be with you.
And at the same time, the bad guys can use the Force.
Find the rebels hidden for you.
As evidenced by this guy, Darth Vader.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Enough of this. Vader, release him.
As you wish.
What's amazing about this movie is that over the course of slightly less than 2 hours, Lucas creates just enough of a belief system to capture our imagination, where Jedi Knights, both good and bad, function as a mix of Knights of the Round Table and samurai. And in the first lightsaber fight in the movie, first of what's going to be many over 9 movies, the spiritual ideas actually become divine. Now, real quick, a side note about these lightsabers, this is the stuff that I geek out over. They were colored in the post-production process, and Lucas wanted to give the good guys red lightsabers and the bad guys blue lightsabers. And his editor, Paul Hirsch, said, well, in Renaissance art, blue is the color of the celestial and red is the color of the earthly, or, evil. And as a result, Lucas changed the colors, and now we have an emotional connection with the color of the lightsaber. But anyway, back to the movie. Obi-Wan dies. He makes the ultimate sacrifice so that his friends, Luke, Han Solo, and Princess Leia can leave. And as Darth Vader steps on the robes, what's the implication? Right? That that Obi-Wan has transcended death, which is confirmed in the climax of the movie when Luke is in the cockpit.
Use the Force, Luke. Let
Anyway, and this part you've already seen. So, by the end of the movie, the Force is a mishmash of all kinds of religious, spiritual, and philosophical ideas. It's big enough that you can project your own beliefs on it. But as Lucas tells us, it's not meant to replace God as organized religion. It's meant to supplement it.
The central epic of our culture has been the Bible, and it's about fall, wandering, redemption, return. But the Bible no longer occupies that central place in our culture today. More and more people today, young people in particular, turning to movies for their inspiration, not to organized religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that doesn't end up being the course that this whole thing takes, because I think there's definitely a place for organized religion. That's a very important part of the social fabric. And I would hate to find ourselves in a completely secular world where entertainment was passing for some kind of religious experience.
One reason, one critic said, that Star Wars has been so popular with young people is religion without strings attached, that it becomes a very thin-based theology
it is a thin base for theology. That's why I would hesitate to call the Force God. When the film came out, almost every single religion took Star Wars and used it as an example of their religion. And were able to relate it to young people and saying this is what, specifically to the Bible, and then relate stories to the Quran and the Torah and things. And so it's like, if it's a tool that can be used to make old stories be new and relate to younger people, that's what the whole point was.
Now, this interview with Bill Moyers is from 1999. And, in it, as you just heard, he discussed how movies have replaced the Bible as a source of inspiration. But now, movies themselves have been replaced in 2025. They've been replaced by what? By social media, by video games, by streaming television. But from 1977 to 1980s, it was movies. It was Star Wars in particular. And all of this set the stage for May 21st, 1980, when The Empire Strikes Back came out. Now, if you were born after the death of print media, let me explain this cover to you. Being on the cover of Time magazine was a big deal. I almost feel bad for the poor Cuban refugees who are in the corner of this cover. But this is a good example of how anticipation for this movie was at an all-time high across the country, especially if you were a child.
Long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, the Star Wars saga began, and Kenner continues the excitement. Tom Hoff won't buy an action figures he'd sold separately.
It's got Luke. Gotcha.
Tom comes with an open belly rescue feature. Tom Hoff won't buy another action figures he'd sold separately from Kenner's Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back collection.
Now, The Empire Strikes Back is considered the best of all the Star Wars movies by fans and by critics. It expands the Star Wars universe in almost every direction. The script is better. Because the script is better, the acting is better, the effects are better. But in terms of spiritual ideas, Lucas and his co-writers, Lee Brackett and especially Lawrence Kasdan, deepened the belief system. They deepened the magical and mystical power of what the Force is, and they did it through one major recognizable character. This guy right here, Yoda. The introduction of Yoda into the saga is a classic misdirect. He starts as an annoying gnome, but we learn that he is much more than that.
Like we're being watched.
Oh, wait, put your weapon. I mean you no harm. I am wondering, why are you here?
I'm looking for someone.
Looking? Found someone you have, I would say. Why wish you become Jedi?
Mostly because of my father, I guess.
Father? Powerful Jedi was he? Powerful Jedi.
Come on. How could you know my father? You don't even know who I am. No, I don't even know what I'm doing here. We're wasting our time.
I cannot teach him. The boy has no patience.
You will learn patience.
Much anger in him. Like his father.
Was I any different when you taught me?
He is not ready.
Yoda. I am ready. Ben, I can be a Jedi. Ben, tell him I'm ready.
Ready, are you? What knows you ready? For 800 years have I trained Jedi. I don't counsel what I do. On whom is to be trained. A Jedi must have the deepest commitment. The most serious mind. This one, a long time have I watched. All his life as he looked away to the future, to the horizon, never his mind on where he was, what he was doing.
So when he's revealed, he clearly takes on a different tone than Alec Guinness did as Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Alec Guinness is a father figure, Yoda is a high school coach. Yoda is doubtful, and you get the sense he's not just going to hand Luke the lessons he needs to grow as a character. And Lucas acknowledged this in the annotated screenplay. He wrote, "I wanted Yoda to be the traditional kind of character where the hero is going down the road and meets this poor and insignificant person. The goal or the lesson is for the hero to learn to pay attention to the poorest person, because that's where the key to his success will be. I wanted Yoda to be the exact opposite of what you might expect, since the Jedi is based on a philosophical idea rather than a physical idea. And true to form, Yoda takes the idea of the Force beyond something you can use, to blow up a Death Star or choke out your generals. And he starts to introduce philosophy with the Force."
All right, I'll give it a try.
No. Why not? Do. Or do not. There is no try.
I can't. It's too big.
Size matters not.
I want to pause here and focus on that message. Do or do not, there is no try. It was a powerful scene in 1980. I would argue it's actually grown more powerful since. But to understand why, we have to go back to that dirty word context. We have to cover what was happening in 1980 when the movie came out. See, then President Jimmy Carter had suffered a catastrophic military defeat in the process of trying to save American hostages from Iran. 8 servicemen died, and 66 American hostages weren't released until Carter left office. Besides that, the fourth recession that I talked about earlier hit the economy in 1979, and these two factors, the Iran hostage crisis and the economy, essentially guaranteed the victory of President Ronald Reagan. And Reagan is nothing if not the image of a president who understood, do or do not, there is no try. And America has been living with the two-fisted message of Ronald Reagan and do or do not ever since. As recently as 2015, Elizabeth Holmes, the soon-to-be disgraced CEO of a blood work company called Theranos, had this on her office wall. And needless to say, it was all a con because Elizabeth Holmes' company was garbage. But the point is, Yoda's words had an impact. And you know what else had an impact? It's the other reason that The Empire Strikes Back is considered the best of all the Star Wars movies, and it goes beyond philosophy into psychology. And it starts with this scene. Remember, at the halfway point, we're in the belly of the beast, and at the halfway point of this movie, Luke goes into a dark cave to face his worst fear.
The dark side of the Force. The domain of evil it is. And you must go.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you.
Can you imagine what Carl Jung would say about this scene? As part of his training, right, Luke has to face his worst nightmare. The movie slows down to dreamy slow motion. He doesn't just face Darth Vader, he faces a symbolic version of Darth Vader, who is a shadow version of himself. The scene is weird, it is symbolic, and it is foreshadowing of what Luke is going to learn at the end of the movie. Now, let's talk about the end of the movie. If Young would have liked the previous scene, Freud would have had a field day with the end of this movie. And for those of you who haven't seen it, or haven't seen it in a while, let me set it up. Yeah, spoiler alert for a 45-year-old movie. At the climax of the movie, Luke does face Darth Vader, for real. And it doesn't go well. Luke loses bad. And when Luke is at his weakest, Darth Vader decides that he's going to lay down some truth.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. He told me it now. He told me you killed him. No. I am your father. Not true. That's impossible. Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
I love that moment. It still gives me chills. And I have to say that I love talking about the spirituality of Star Wars, but there's one reason that I am talking to you today, and it's the following little bit of trivia. We have to ask the question that has divided Star Wars since 1980, which is, did George Lucas know all along that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father? He insists that he did. And the clues are all there, right? If you look at the name, Darth is a portmanteau of dark and death, and Vader is the Dutch word for father, right? Dark, death, father. Come on, it's right there. There's one argument against it, and we have to go back to 1962, before the fateful accident that risked George Lucas's life, to George Lucas's yearbook, because he graduated with a gentleman named Gary Vader. Gary Vader. Can you imagine Mr. Vader's life after 1977? You think he joined a support group with Robert bin Laden and Larry Hitler and said, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. I am sympathetic to Mr. Vader's plight because my name rhymes with half the English language. I totally get it. Anyway, back to the movie. We're talking about how weirdly Freudian the end of The Empire Strikes Back is, because as part of this ending, just to jumble a whole bunch of beats together, we have Luke and Darth Vader fighting with very phallic-shaped objects. Darth Vader symbolically castrates Luke. He reveals who he is in a reverse Oedipal moment. Luke rejects it. He jumps off and falls into a fallopian tube, at which point he gets spat out and rebirthed on a netherworld of clouds, at which point he calls out for anyone? His sister! He calls out for his sister. Remember, this is a movie for kids. But I want to come back to Griffin's question, how is this spiritual? Well, to answer that, I'd like to attack it kind of sideways, because the director of the movie, Irwin Kershner, said something very interesting. He said, I was talking to kids, and I discovered that kids below the age of 9 go, no, he, meaning Darth Vader, he's not his father, he's lying, they can't accept it, but at 10, they can accept it. Why is it hard for kids under the age of 10 to accept that Darth Vader is Luke's father? Well, Darth Vader is the bad guy, and our fathers are supposed to be good guys, aren't they? And then, if you're a kid, you go, wait, if Luke is the hero, and Darth Vader is his dad, what does that say about Luke if his dad is the devil? But there's another part of the Luke-Vader fight that I want to focus on. And this part happens earlier. And there's a reason I'm sort of organizing it this way. Now that everyone in the room knows, the cat is out of the bag about who Darth Vader is, I want you to watch this earlier part of the fight. And this time I want you to watch knowing what you know, and I want you to view this scene as a form of parental abuse. So what's spiritual about this? Is it mythical? Sure. But what's spiritual about it? Well, at this point in the story, Luke suffers. He suffers physically, he suffers psychologically, he's at his greatest moment of weakness and doubt, and when faced with the decision of what to do, he simply lets go. He takes a leap into the unknown. And again, this suffering is all over the stories of our major religions, from Christ's passion, to Buddha's suffering, to becoming the Buddha, to Muhammad's persecution in Mecca. And yet, despite Darth Vader being a literal, thank you, that was Jim's joke. Despite Darth Vader being a literal man in black, kids react to him in a different way. And it starts therapeutically, but then it becomes spiritual in a very universal way.
I've had psychotherapists tell me that they use Star Wars sometimes to deal with the problems of their child patients. And they've said that the most popular character among the children is Darth Vader.
Well, children love power because children are the powerless. And so their fantasies all center on having power. And who's more powerful than Darth Vader? You know, some, will be attracted to Luke Skywalker because he's the good guy. But ultimately, we all know that Darth Vader is more powerful than he is.
Did you feel?
And as time goes on, you discover that he is more powerful because he's the ultimate father who is all-powerful.
This is where I disagree somewhat with our friend Joseph Campbell, who said that the young man has to slay his father before he can become an adult himself. It seems to me, and I think you're right on here, that the young man has to has to recognize and acknowledge that he is his father and is not his father.
You know, Joe used to talk about the basic issues that create the mystery of life, of birth and death. And I like to always add, your relationship with your parents. My father wanted me to go into the stationery business and run an office equipment store.
Was that a struggle not to do that?
It wasn't a struggle because I knew immediately that wasn't what I wanted. And he thought that I would go off and starve to death as some kind of artist somewhere living in Europe. No, he died a number of years ago. But he died after I did Star Wars. So he was very proud of me at the end. And I did the only thing you have to do. If you're healthy and you can take care of yourself and you're a good person, you contribute to society and not take away. That's all your parents want in the end.
So that's the ultimate psychology. George Lucas is working out his own issues with his father on a big screen in huge mythic terms. And this is also the most daring that the Star Wars movies get over the next three movies. Because when we get to 1983's Return of the Jedi, the Force and the mythical terms of the Force don't get expanded on much, but there are two spiritual ideas that I think are worth focusing on because they tie the three movies together. And the first is the idea of destiny. Destiny really takes focus in Return of the Jedi. But for context, destiny is mentioned throughout the previous two movies, as you'll see in this montage.
Your destiny lies along a different path from mine.
If once you start down the dark path, forever will it not make your destiny consume you at will. As it did Obi-Wan's apprentice.
Vader.
Your destiny lies with me, Skywalker. Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny.
Okay, great, but what is destiny? Definitionally, what is it, right? Well, it's events that will necessarily happen to a particular person or thing in the future. Focus on the word necessarily, because we're going to come back to it again and again. Jesus Christ was destined to die on the cross. He was destined to rise in 3 days. But here's the thing. There's a second big spiritual idea introduced in the movie. And that idea, which is complex for a kid's movie, is moral relativism. Or as the movie puts it, something is true from a certain point of view.
I can't do it. I can't go on alone.
Yoda will always be with you.
Obi-Wan. Why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Anakin was a good friend.
So we have these two ideas. We have destiny, which means it's necessarily true, and we have the truth is dependent on our point of view. And you put these ideas together and they come into conflict. And that's why Luke's journey, his struggle over what is his destiny, is the prime moral conflict throughout the rest of the movie. And we get this emotional tension when Luke first confronts Darth Vader, and then Darth Vader's boss, the Emperor.
I will not turn, and you'll be forced to kill me.
If that is your destiny,
With each passing moment, you make yourself more my servant.
No.
It is unavoidable. It is your destiny. You, like your father, are now mine. Now, fulfill your destiny. Take your father's place at my side.
So Luke rejects the false choice, right? He makes his own choice. And in the process, he saves his father's soul because his father makes the decision to make one redeeming choice at the end of his life. Which brings us to the end of the movie where Luke and his father have a heartfelt goodbye. I promise we're not just going to watch the movie.
Go, my son. Leave me.
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have. You were right. You were right about me. Tell your sister. You were right.
Father. I won't leave you.
So even though Darth Vader has killed millions, billions, trillions with the Death Star, even though he was choking out his own generals, even though he dealt a serious beatdown to his own son, this scene gets me every time. He gets me every time. And think about what it means, not just for the end of this movie, but for the end of the trilogy. Yes, we have a destiny, but there are choices that we can make that can change our destiny. And no sin is too great that we can't find redemption. And if we repent at the moment of death, we can be Force ghosts with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. That core idea of redemption from the choices we make, that is its own hero's journey. You can map the hero's journey across the three movies, not just the movie individually. And that's why the original trilogy took such hold on our imagination and our spiritual lives, and I would argue that it still does today. Thank you for letting me and Jimmy nerd out about Star Wars. And of course,